we heard you hadn't heard enough about Russia today, so we got another one in store for you here. So my name is Dan. I'm a manager on the cyber espionage analysis team. It's my colleague Anton. He's one of the researchers. We both work very heavily on some of the operations going on inside of Ukraine. And so before we get into the depths of the technical bits of our presentation today, I wanted to spend a couple minutes just rewinding time back to the spring of 2023 and the lead up to Ukraine's, the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine. And so for those of you that haven't followed the conflict very closely, that spring of 2023 was a very precarious moment for the Russian military. At that point in time, they had been forced to abandon their maximalist objectives, to seize Ukraine's capital, and had to settle for some secondary objectives in the east of Ukraine in the Donbass region. Ukraine had surprised Russian forces in the fall of 2022, recapturing lots of territory in Kharkiv. And then that winter, the highly costly winter offensive in Bakhmut had very little to show for it for the Russian military, other than tens of thousands of casualties. Suffice to say, at this point in time in the conflict, things are just not going very well for the Russian military. Even more importantly, on the horizon, what we have is Ukraine's highly anticipated counteroffensive in the summer of 2023, this time backed by Western training and equipment, and largely seen in capitals across Europe, North America, and in Moscow itself as a very critical juncture in the war. This was supposed to be a pivotal moment. And it's at this moment where we really start to see a tide change in the nature of Russia's cyber campaign. As they start to shift to the defensive, we start to see the nature of what they're doing change in very specific ways. And so I think the folks who have been here for the last few years have seen our colleagues, Gabby Roncone, John Wolfram, Mike Worley, talk about some of the destructive attacks that have happened. The first year in Ukraine was all about sabotage, right? What we saw, and I hope the graphic is big enough for you there, but we saw this concerted campaign of wiper attacks against things like the Ukrainian government, media entities, civilian infrastructure targets like Ukraine's energy grid, water utilities. In Russian military writing, these things are often referred to as the anthropogenic shell of a country. These are the life support systems that, if disrupted, hold the potential to grind a society to a halt, to take away their capacity to resist. And so what this first year was really this attempt to amass psychological pressure indirectly to support the Russian conventional forces on the ground. But what we see in that first year is Russia starts to realize that they're not really getting the juice from that they wanted, that the military benefit of these operations just wasn't translating in the ways that they had hoped. And so right at that one-year anniversary is where we start to see this massive shift in the nature of the operations from Russia's intelligence services. And at this point in time, it's not just the GRU, but we're starting to see other aspects, the FSB, proxy groups start to lean into targeting military systems and devices. And so this is not just about a pivot away from sabotage to espionage, but it's a fundamental shift in the nature of the targeting that we see. It's no longer against enterprise targets, it's against personal devices, smartphones, tablets. It's about endpoints at this point in time. It's not about government networks, these counter-value targets. It's about going after counter-force targets, the things that are being used on the front lines by the Ukrainian military. And what's really important in all this is that the nature of the information that they're seeking is really about having that more direct benefit to the Russian military on the ground. So things like geolocation data, military command and control information, communications, things of that nature. And so I think Tuesday this week was the 1,000th day of Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine. For the past 600 days, this has been the focus of the operations. I think there's this popular narrative that, it's all been about sabotage. The focus is about wiper attacks and stuff like that. That hasn't been the case for the better part of 2 years at this point in time. And so today, we're going to give you a taste of what some of that activity has looked like in practice. We're going to look at 3 different groups specifically. So we're going to start off a little bit of APT-44, everyone's favorite sandworm. Get your bingo dabbers out and hit that one for yourselves. We're going to follow up with UNC-5125. It's a group that we track as a suspected cluster of Turla that is specifically focused on Ukrainian drone units. And then we're going to finalize the presentation with talking about a new group that has emerged in the context of the conflict, UNC-4221, who is a very sustained focus on soldiers' mobile devices on the front lines. So before I move forward, I just wanted to caveat here that while we're only focusing on these three groups today, the scale of this activity is absolutely enormous. We're tracking about 12 other clusters of activity that are very narrowly focused today on Ukrainian military systems and devices, and we're starting to see more and more diversity of actors kind of involved in that activity. For there, I will hand over to Anton to talk to you a little bit about APT44.
Hey, yeah, so as Dan mentioned, we think that from the early stages of the Russian invasion, APT44, they probably played one of the key role in all of the Russian cyber efforts against Ukraine. And of course, we saw how they definitely changed lots of their tactics, because initially, when the invasion that started, they looks like have lots of coordinated actions. When the final and full missions of Russians are failed in Ukraine, I mean, they can't capture the Kyiv, they can't capture the whole country. So they trying to adopt some of the techniques. They do some kind of a random wiping. They just trying to wipe everything as they can. But of course, they for this moment, we saw lots of attempts how they started to shift away from sabotage from the classic sabotage to the espionage activity. The first example, it's like what we call it's APT44, enabling the close access exploitation of the captured devices. So I think during one of the investigation, we identify interesting domain name. We believe that this domain name are created and supported by one of the APT44 persona and group. So the domain name, it's like an offensive word against Ukrainians, or against all the Ukrainians, definitely. So it's contained the Telegram and Signal links with clear instructions or like tutorials, how to connect compromised devices with the Signal or with from their Signals or the Telegram accounts. And interesting point here that these instructions are built if you have a physical access to the devices. So that's why, like, we believe that APT44 built this, let's call it tool or website, just for their soldiers who are now in the front lines. And when they capture physically some kind of a device, so they can use this the website to easily put the data to the APT44 control at the server. And they also provide like a link to the Telegram, aka like support if you have any issues or something like that. And that's how it looks like. So that's how the tutorials looks like. So it's a separate tutorial for Telegram, separate tutorial for the Signals, just like a basic actions. But even if we just quickly read all of these actions, it's definitely require only physical access to the device. And that's how it looks like from the specific example. So from the Telegram, you just need only to open the unique link, and then you just need to put the phone number of the victim, and that's how you link the Telegram accounts and probably all of the data exfiltrated to the actor server. With the Signal, a little bit different. They just provide a unique IP address with the unique and custom port, as you can see, where you can obtain the unique QR codes, and through this QR code you can easily link the compromised device. So potentially we suspect that behind of all of this infrastructure, we can find something like a collection platform for analysis, because they definitely obtained lots of different compromised devices, as we suspect. So that's why it's like one of the significant risks for the people and for the Ukraine military who are in fields right now. The second point, the second story, I think in 2023, US government and Ukraine government published amazing story, what they called Infamous Chisel. So it's Android malware, which is used to target specific category of Ukraine military officers. So with this malware, they can do some kind of exfiltration of the mobile devices. So it's like related to the WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and Discord, which is like interesting, and also they focus on the specific file extensions, to get the geolocation data, call logs, chat messages, like a signal database history and some of the camera-related information. Why we're trying to highlight this story right here, it's just because based on our initial analysis, based on our observation of this campaign, we believe that it's one of the significant and one of the, let's say, crazy operation from the APT-44 in their history. I mean, of course, if we talk outside about their global disruptive campaign, and of course you can find lots of details on the Ukraine Security Service website. They have a detailed report about this activity as well. And the last one regarding the APT-44, I think in 2022 we published the public blog. It's related to the like a new campaign, like new for us at this point of time. So the attackers started to use like a malicious pirate software, like a Windows installation files or a Microsoft Office installation files. And they start to distribute this software to the Ukraine popular torrent tracker. So there's why it's popular, just because lots of this like pirate software are like translated to the Ukrainian language. And of course, they don't try to catch like any kind of, like a victim from such campaign, because they definitely don't need all of the victims. They only want to focus on the specific targets, and when they compromise the system, they are looking for the basic host name information, like IP, like a host name, or the name of the machine, and based on this information, they identify that this host is priority. We also know that they have a list of the priority applications, priority for the APT-44. It's related to the specific Ukraine military application, some of the government systems, so they are looking for such access on the victims. And only when decided this, the victim is a priority, then they start to deploy additional malware like a DC-RAT. But why we also want to add more regarding this malware campaign. So this campaign is still ongoing. We published in 2022, I think we also saw that CERTUA's published additional observation of this group on their website. And we know that after lots of this public noise, they probably change their tactics a little bit. Because previously we saw in the first case when we observed them on this forum, we are sure that this is a unique, this account created by the APT-44 actors. On next examples, we start to see that they use some kind of new accounts for that, and I will show it a little bit later. So that's how it's the typical malware alert looks like a malicious event. You can see the PowerShell, and you can see the onion domain name. Yeah, they also outside of their inside of their traditional like methods, they really love to use any kind of a Tor, specifically as a C2. And of course, with the onion domain names, it's so hard to do additional pivoting because it's not possible with such things. Yeah, so they are looking for lots of different military application, and we saw how this initial compromise is used for the future access. And it's quite fun, a conversation between the legitimate user and actor on the forum, because one of the guys just said like, oh, I'm just get a Microsoft Defender alert on your the installation file, like what I should do. And the actor responds like, don't worry, it's just like a normal patch. That's why it's like you have alerts, you don't need to worry about that. So it's quite interesting technique in this case. And we also observed that this account was created in 2010 to distribute this malware, APT-44 malware, which is probably not possible. So then we just look into the internal data related to the credential leaks, and we easily identified that this account was previously been compromised by one of the public stealer. We saw such attempts how the sandworm, aka APT-44 or APT-44, aka sandworm, starting to use this a technique when they got data from the stealers, but it's just interesting to see that they do that again. And the last point here, it's the torrent tracker administration probably created a new rule after our investigation and CERT investigation in public, and they have they ask some of the users to upload the file to the virus total and provide the link that there is no malicious content there. And it's sometimes actors, APT44 actors do that. Yeah, and just one more example how they switch it also from the Windows installation file or Office. They also use some lots of different sets of the looks like legitimate software to get more benefits from such campaign.
Thanks. Yeah, so pivoting over to the cluster that we track as UNC5125, the suspected cluster for Turla, the FSB linked group, who has been very narrowly focused on frontline drone units. So this is a subcluster of the wider group that we've been tracking. So one of the more interesting bits that we've seen them do is using Google Forms for reconnaissance against potential drone operators. So what you see there is a questionnaire that they crafted in Google Forms that appears to be a questionnaire for a dronarium military academy. The military academy is used to teach folks how to do air reconnaissance and how to fly drones in a combat zone. And so what's really interesting here is often when you're looking at an actor's reconnaissance from a threat intelligence perspective, you don't really get to see explicitly what the actor's interested in, right? But in this case, lucky for us, they define mandatory fields on the Google form, so we get a really intimate look at what they're trying to achieve here. So you can see on the right-hand side, if you can see the red asterisks that are beside some of these different fields on the document. So they're looking for a military unit number, so they want to understand what the individual is associated with in terms of the order of battle in Ukraine. They're looking for a name or a call sign of the individual, so information that they can use to tailor their follow-on social engineering efforts and make the messaging look more credible. They'll take your email address, but they don't really want it that badly, right? There's no mandatory field there for the person's email. But what they're really looking for here is a phone number for the individual and to ask them what platform they'd like to be reached out on, where are they likely going to be responding from if they get that phone number. So is it Signal, is it Telegram, or is it WhatsApp? One other interesting bit, at the end of the form that they used here, they also included a consent form as one of those mandatory fields in referencing a Ukrainian privacy law for the processing of personal data. An interesting little bit of savvy social engineering to make the form look legitimate, right? If you were to go to something like this that were legitimate, it may have some sort of mandatory field of this nature. Now, the way that we see them using these selectors when they get their hands on them is for very highly targeted malware delivery over these messaging applications like Signal. So in the case that you see here, we see those selectors being used for a highly targeted malware delivery using a malware that we call Messy-Fork that CERT Ukraine has written publicly about as Cookbox. Now, what's really interesting about this case is you can see there's a little bit of rapport being built with the target before it's delivered. The messages that you're seeing on the left-hand side there are being sent to a UAV operator in Ukraine. And what's even more interesting, I think, is you see as they are trying to get that person to click the document and enable the malware delivery chain to initiate, they're actually, you see the missed phone calls there. So that's the operator from UNC5125 calling the victim to try to get them to open the document and kick off the malware delivery chain. So a savvy little bit of social engineering in play there as well. If opened, it kicks off a chain that uses PowerShell to download from an actor-controlled GitHub account, ultimately leading to this lightweight backdoor that is self-developed. Now, notably, with this group or this cluster of Turla activity, we keep seeing them use dynamic DNS infrastructure and Cloudflare workers instances for command and control, so keeping it very low equity in terms of the infrastructure, using free infrastructure pretty much across all the operations here. Some really good public reporting on this from CERT Ukraine, as well as I think Cloudflare has a blog under the name Flying Yeti. So if you are more interested in this activity, I suggest you check that out. We also have seen this cluster of Turla creating Android malware that mimics legitimate military applications. So in the case that you see on here, they created a fake website for a Ukrainian company named Griselda. Griselda is a company that makes software for processing battlefield data with artificial intelligence. And so what's perhaps most interesting is Griselda doesn't actually have a legitimate application. UNC5125 created their app for them for the first time here by modifying the Hydra banking Trojan. Again, I would highlight a lot of this stuff for the targeted endpoint targeting is very much about savvy social engineering, right? They created this fake website, it looks identical. Even if you were to scan that QR code, it would take you back to the main page of the fake website. So it has Griselda branding built into the QR code. They really went out of their ways to make some of these resources look legitimate. At this point, if you were to click the download button, it delivers you that Hydra banking Trojan that's been modified. It does all the functionality you would expect of the Hydra banking Trojan, so it's looking for authentication data, one-time passwords, SMS history, things of those nature. The modifications made are A, to make it look like a Griselda application, but B, also to remove execution guardrails for Ukrainian and Russian language. So it's something that is typically in criminal malware, but they had to change those settings to make sure it'd be effective against the Ukrainian military targets. In another example of similar activity, we saw UG5125 modifying a legitimate application used by the Ukrainian military, particularly drone units for screen recording. So the OCHI app here, it's widely used. The logo there is a reference to the 120th Special Reconnaissance Battalion that is part of Ukraine's order of battle. What they did here is take the legitimate application, inject the Java class into it that added some capabilities for credential and geolocation theft. Again, this was delivered over signal messaging as an apparent software update for OCHI. When they sent a Google Drive link, that Google Drive link contained a bunch of documents, legitimate documents that would be used for instructions for how to install the legitimate OCHI app, as well as the malicious APK file that you can see highlighted there in red. I would note in both cases here that the malware, the APK files were being delivered outside the Play Store, so trying to circumvent some of the protections there to be successful. And that's it on that front, handing over for UG4221.
Yeah, so the final candidate, 4221. If I'm not wrong, we tracked them from the September 2022, but based on some of the initial data, we think that they operate at least starting from 2022 originally. And they mostly focus it on to compromise Ukraine mobile devices, with this case remotely. They do some what we call device linking, right? So they send the phishing messages. Mostly they prefer the signal, but of course we know that they operate through the three platform, like Telegram, WhatsApp, and Signal. So when scanning the QR code link the victim phone to the actor controlled infrastructure, what is dangerous, really dangerous here, it's not historical data. They don't collect just a signal DB file and start to see and analyze historical data, what's victim produced during the last week or something like that. They start to automatically receive all of the messages in the live mode to their controlled Telegram bot of the actor. And it's really dangerous because they can see the live communication. They can see the victim-specific location, which is definitely a big risk with such things. And there is an example. Before I go to this slide, for the context, Ukraine created lots of great applications to support military efforts. It's not specifically cyber-related. It's, directly military operations. And one of these applications is called the Kropiva. It's mostly developed for the artillerists, teams. It's just like an Android app. It's like an artillery calculator when you just can put any kind of coordinates and data, and you can, with this application, you can identify the specific location of artillery system. And you just should decide the coordinates for your target. Of course, as you know, artillerist is always the priority target for both sides. And that's why Russians are so interested to compromise them. And there's a typical link, Teneta. In this link, it's like a part of the Kropiva application. It's like internal net. It's like internal groups, and they're just like a example of how they do that, and they do that mostly like in the really massive waves to get more visibility through the captured communication through the live mode. Thanks.
So I'll take you through the home stretch here for UG4221. So across all the operations that we've seen from this group, there has been a principal focus on trying to collect geolocation information from them. It's one of the core aspects. So we track the code that they use for this as pinpoint. You can see the snapshot there, and you can see a GIF of how that kind of works in some of the phishing infrastructure that they use on the right-hand side. When the website loads, this code is essentially used to load the browser geolocation API. So if you've ever browsed to a website and it said, hey, share your location with us, it's the exact same functionality. What they're hoping is that you accept that, whether or not the malicious components of that phishing campaign continue to deliver after the fact. And so in some instances, we've seen this used separate from the use of the credential harvesting or the device linking efforts that they've had. So an example you see there on the left-hand side is a crafted fake WhatsApp group invite bearing an image of an RQ-20 Puma drone, one of the drone systems that's been given to Ukraine by the United States, as well as referencing it. So after the geolocation prompt would come up, they were prompted with this. If you were to join that group, it's an actor-controlled WhatsApp group. We're not fully sure of how they're using those on the back end, but we imagine that the intent there is to collect things, selectors like their names, phone numbers, and perhaps being used for some sort of follow-on payload delivery as well. We also have seen them focusing on another very prominent application used by the Ukrainian military called Delta. So for those of you that aren't aware what Delta is, this is being used on the front lines by units on tablets, smartphones, et cetera, to get real-time intelligence feeds of the Ukrainian order battle, so where blue forces are as well as where some of the red forces are. It can be a matter of life and death for soldiers to be using something like this because of the way that artillery is automated today on the battlefield. And so we've seen them both create a tailored phishing kit from scratch, which includes a custom proxy framework that they reference themselves as a replacement for Modlishka in some of the code comments that we've seen, as well as they tried to place a fake Delta application into the App Store as well. Interestingly, again, Delta doesn't actually have an official application on the App Store. It's only a web application. So again, they are creating an app for something to try to make it legitimate that doesn't actually exist. This was disrupted very early on in the operation. There was very little traction in terms of what was able to be delivered to the Ukrainian military. Now, interestingly enough, just like Anton was saying with APT44 and some of the device linking stuff that they were trying to achieve, where there was some derogatory terms baked into the capability, you can see here in the red highlighted box that there's another slur baked in into the capability right on the left-hand side before the proxy framework is reached out to for command and control. Just another little bit of mindset into the operators and some of the ways that they're thinking about their targets and victims here. We track the Delta fake application here as stale cookie. And then one little bit of bonus content in terms of some of the UNC-422's operations that are happening further back from the front lines, but are particularly interesting as well. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Ukrainian government operates a series of Telegram bots that can be used to report things like military equipment sightings, force sightings, if there's a group of Russian forces in a specific area, things like that. So examples of what those look like in practice here. The one on the left being run by the main intelligence director of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the one on the right being run by the Ministry of Digital. So what UNC-422 has done is created their own version of this called Patriot Bot. Patriot is a pseudonym used by one of the operators quite frequently in a lot of their operations, and it basically reaches out and says, I'm Patriot Bot, send me information about orcs, I'll pass it on, let's fight against Russians together, glory to Ukraine. Now the idea here is that for someone who's trying to deliver that content to the Ukrainian government, it's now being intercepted, it's not making it to their hands, but also they're able to identify that individual, and what we believe they're doing there is trying to use that information to suppress some of the counter-resistance movements in the occupied territories by identifying those individuals. So yeah, just to close out here, got a couple minutes left. These cross-cutting efforts to collect military signals intelligence is something that we believe is going to remain a cornerstone of Russia's campaign in Ukraine as the war continues. It's been the focus for them for a better part of 2 years now, and it seems to be a feedback signal on our end that if they're continuing to do this at the pace that they've been doing it and the scaling out of that activity that we've seen, that this is definitely something that they believe they're getting benefit from and that they're going to continue to do into the near future. It is also kind of a signal of the convergence between SIGINT and cyber operations. The traditional mission that would have been carried out by SIGINT units is now kind of bleeding into what we see from cyber elements that we track. The centers of gravity for some of this activity, so mobile devices are the center of gravity of all of this. Everything surrounds around the technology that's being carried by soldiers on the front lines these days. And there's also obviously across all different actors that we showed you today that very specific interest in secure messaging applications like Signal and WhatsApp, and not so secure messaging applications like Telegram. And then also there's this central focus on drone operators, right? And I think one of the biggest lessons that's emerged from this conflict is the ways that drones have transformed the character of warfare on the front lines in Ukraine. There seems to be a very strong recognition of that in the Russian cyber forces, and they are very, very heavily focused on trying to be able to penetrate the technologies that they're using to fly their drones for both counterintelligence purposes, but also to enable follow-on conventional activity against them. And so, yeah, the collection priorities there, all three of these groups heavily after geolocation data, those military communications that are being carried out over common applications like Signal, and that real-time battlefield information coming from applications like Delta and Propiva, things like that. And so I wanted to close with one thought that I think is really important here, and is that these operations carry a significant risk for loss of life for Ukrainian forces. I think there's been this habit of minimizing what's been going on in Ukraine, saying not a lot of things are happening in cyberspace, but that really is far from the truth, and the potential for these operations to have grave consequences for their targets is really there. And I think one of the things that we need to reflect on as a community sometimes a bit better is that cyber operations are just a means to an end, right? And so in peacetime, that means maybe collecting strategic intelligence. It may be supporting some sort of covert statecraft here and there. But when you're in a large-scale conventional war like we're seeing in Ukraine right now, sometimes that means is to enable lethal effects against targets, right? And often when we see a wiper, we tend to really spool up as a community and start paying attention to the wipers. And there's this dismissiveness about espionage and reconnaissance activity and these things as kind of run-of-the-mill, more of the same. And I think what we really need to appreciate is that this is the stuff that's having the biggest impact on the front lines, and it deserves much more of our attention today. And so on that note, thank you all for your attention, and we'd want to extend a really, 1 second. Thanks. If I could just say one thing too, we wanted to extend a really big thank you and kudos to the cyber team of the Armed Forces of Ukraine as well, who's been an incredible investigative partner here and is doing tons of work to keep Ukrainian soldiers safe and secure on the front line. So big round of applause for them too, please.